Thank you for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you. Maddy, I'd love to hear in your words, like, what do you do all day?
Sure. Yeah. Well, it certainly depends on the day, but usually sitting in front of my computer, running the Blogsmith, my content company, and working with our team that's pretty much all over the world. And so a day could be meeting with clients. It could be helping to approve content in our workflow. It could be building processes to make the agency run more efficiently, or it could be trips to Vegas. Was the case.
I'm coming back to that later in this conversation because I want to talk more about that.
Absolutely.
So what would you say your role is? Obviously founder of the Blogsmith, but if you had to give a short job description, provided what you do every day, like how would you define that?
Sure. I think what I want it to be and what I'm moving towards is something to do with growth. And right now that includes things like business development.
Okay.
Branding, being on podcasts is one way to do that. Speaking at different events and getting the word out basically through other people's channels about what we do. I think that's the role that I want to have for now. In addition to kind of going back to like the process building idea, I like building things. I like creating things. That's kind of my like web designer background. Before I did all this, that's what I did.
Wow.
And I realized that that's like not the perfect fit role for me for where I am today, but I think it still plays into what I like to do.
Yeah, like how your brain works.
Yeah. And so I think that what I'm trying to get away from is being sort of like the person who's in charge of the day-to-day, meeting with clients, responding to things that are happening within our workflow that somebody else maybe has the answer to. And so that's kind of what I'm building towards right now.
Yeah, I can relate to the pulling yourself out of the weeds thing, not just because it's not really scalable, but it's also like there's people that are better at some of that stuff than you are, especially as things like change and grow, industries change and everything. So totally. I definitely want to hear more about this web designer background. Sure. I did not know that.
Yeah, I feel like I hide it now almost. But
no, I love it.
It is the reason why we work with a lot of WordPress brands, because it kind of comes from that background. And so basically, when I was much younger, I think I was 11, I taught myself HTML and CSS. I found this really cool website called Clarissa Explains It All, kind of like the, Melissa Joan Hart sort of show from way back. And lots of like bold, bright colors. Like I could visualize it right now, but it was like a very approachable, like, here's how to code for beginners. And so I ran with that. I like customized my Neopets page.
Oh my gosh.
My MySpace profile eventually.
That's amazing.
That's where it started. And then in college, I was looking, what could I do on campus? It could work at one of the big campus positions, like one of the food halls or whatever, but don't really want to do that. And I saw an opening for a web design position now it's called Student Life Marketing and Design, but it's basically like we would work with the student orgs or the bookshop and whatever their website needs are, whatever their marketing needs are. And so that's where I that's where I kind of put my skills to the test. Mm-hmm. But it's also where I discovered that I really liked content, because I think my boss noticed like I'm a little bit like more of like a chatty person than the average web developer. And they had some need for help with like the student life blog and social media channels.
Okay.
And so that's where it started.
So where'd you go to school again?
University of Iowa.
Oh my God, my dad went there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're like huge Hawkeye fans. How did I not know this?
Well, oh my goodness. Get it a game in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We usually like to go to Kinnick around like Thanksgiving, depending on who they're playing. But oh my gosh, we're definitely coming back to that.
So much fun.
College jobs. Yeah, that's where I first got into writing too, the newspaper, and a couple other things. But yeah, it's interesting what you say about like the education aspect of your job. I feel like more so now with social media and blogging and just general, like this, I don't know, culture of education, which is really great because there's so much at our disposal, but some stuff takes a lot of domain expertise and kind of like training on the back end. Like not everyone can teach web design, just like you can't really Google it and then write about it. Like some topics you can. So how did that play a role in where you are? I guess we'll start a little bit smaller. When you founded the Blogsmith, I remember working with you back at HubSpot, and you wrote a lot about WordPress and HTML and CSS and everything. What was the leap like from where you were in college to kind of the beginnings of the Blogsmith?
Sure. So I took on a couple full-time jobs after I graduated, and I freelanced to the side. That also came from that college job. My boss, he had a freelance website design project, and he just like didn't have time to do it. And so he passed it off to me. And that's when I realized I could work for myself. I needed like the permission almost.
Right.
But after that, I started freelancing on the side of those full-time jobs, all sorts of stuff, social media, blogging, websites, just, whatever anybody would hire me for, of course. And from there, I basically had one client that represented a lot of work ongoing, kind of like this promise that I would have this ongoing work. And this person I had done a couple of articles for, and then he had like a greater need. He needed some social media help for his clients. He needed other articles for his clients, etc. And so he was kind of testing out the idea of having like a virtual assistant, which would be me.
Okay.
And then, so that gave me the confidence to quit my full-time job and know that I would at least have like rent, like is taken care of. And then I just need to kind of hustle for everything else that I wanted and need. And that's when I started freelancing. And then when it became more of like this agency model, I think I just realized I had a realization that I didn't want to do all the things. I really liked content. I thought that was something I could build a repeatable process around, because you could do that with social and web design, but it's just going off into different tangents.
Yeah.
And so that's when whenever I had that realization, I started to hire more people, build the pieces necessary to scale into that model, documenting everything, basically being all the different positions so that I could document them and then train someone else, like account management, project management, keyword research, editing.
Wow. That's incredible.
It was fun, but it was also like, I'm happy to hire somebody else to do these things.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of the power of like replacing yourself.
Exactly.
I want to talk a little bit more about the process side of things, like process and then documentation. I know that was what our call was about like a year or so ago. Just like you were like the process queen. And I was like, please help me. I know that comes from, like you said, your web development, web designer background, but how did you get started with that? Was that something you knew you needed to do from the beginning? Was process like documentation in order to hire, or did you like learn through trial and error? Like, how did you kind of come about that?
Yeah, it definitely trial and error.
I think that's what most people say. I feel like documentation does not come easily to like anybody. It's like not fun to like basically do the job twice. Is what it feels like for me, at least.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of everybody's opinion of it. It's definitely creating a harder initial task, but the goal, of course, is that it gets smoother from here on out. So that's kind of the thing that I keep in the back of my head.
Yeah.
I think that like I had a business degree. I feel like the things that we covered are probably mostly applicable to what I do now. But one of the things I wish that they would have taught us was process improvement, process creation. I think it is something that you get into if you're more on like the operations side of things. So if like my degree was more on that side, or maybe if I had gotten an MBA or something, it would come into play. But it's so fundamental for whether you run a business, whether you're part of a business. I can't think of somebody who wouldn't benefit from that knowledge. So I feel like that was totally left out of my education.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I also have a business degree and I don't remember talking about that at all.
It wasn't even
touched. We talk about the 4 P's of marketing. So as long as we learn that, right? So what would you say even through today are like the three most important processes that you have set up at the Blogsmith?
Sure. Our biggest one is our content production workflow. And I will say that how I like decided that that was the way I wanted to go, how I structured and developed that, it really came from not finding what I wanted in project management tools. So like or Asana or whatever. I couldn't find exactly what I wanted. And so then I started using this tool called Process Street, which allowed me to build whatever I wanted within kind of the limits of, whatever tools they have, whatever sort of variables and functions that they have within their builder. But it's pretty comprehensive. Almost anything I can think of, I can build with that tool. And there's others like it. That just happens to be my favorite. So I guess like a piece of useful feedback for anybody listening is like, maybe if you're having a problem with like project management, maybe it's a process management problem.
What would you say is the difference? Like if you could define it, obviously the words are different, but in your experience.
Yeah. And I think you still need some sort of project management functionality. So for us, it's been Google Sheets, which is a little funky, but we're moving it to Airtable to be kind of like, here's everything that's happening and just like the high level details. But process management is the minutia. So it's like, when does the editor need to touch this? And I don't want them to touch it until, it's their time and the outline's approved or the draft's approved, whatever it is that they specifically need to be involved with, not getting that sort of like ping in their inbox until it really is time, because otherwise it's just a distraction and it's consuming.
So what was the typical project management tools? What were they missing for you?
It's a couple things. Some of them, it's like I couldn't figure out how to get the notification settings right. So it was like overdoing it. Some of it wouldn't let me get really granular with task management. And I think the thing that's interesting about Process Street is that you can add sort of like inline comments and details. So it's like, it's maybe the task is write an outline. And so in Process Street, I can add in like the link to our template. And I could also add some conditional logic that, this particular client wants us to use this template, or these things definitely need to be present. And so conditional logic is another huge part of it for me. There are some options for that on some of the project management tools I've used, but not to the level that I can get in Process Street.
Interesting. Yeah, I remember us talking about that. We didn't end up using it at the time, but as we get into more complicated projects and need like more templated like processes, it's always been on the back of my mind ever since you told me about it. Is there anything missing from that tool that you'd say, or has it worked pretty well for you?
It's worked pretty well. I think whenever there is an issue, they're really open to feedback and you can tell they're working on it.
Yeah.
I will say it's maybe even a better fit for like an enterprise business in general. That's kind of how they build themselves. So there's probably more support even for, bigger businesses that have bigger contracts with them or whatever. But I found them to be very, very good with feedback, taking it, making things better in light of that. And just to give you a couple other ideas of like different processes. So it's like our whole content workflow, but then it's also things like we have a workflow for like our account manager and project manager. And so every day it's like reminder to do this and like give us a report on this. And it's just prompts. And you can also, another thing that's cool about Process Street is they have an approvals feature. So you can get a ping when something's ready, when somebody checks it off. And then if there is anything you have to do, or if you need to send it back to them, it's kind of built in. And then another big workflow that we use in Process Street is hiring, because a lot of those steps are repeatable. You can kind of fashion up email templates within there. And then you can also use variables. So it's like I already entered the person's name here, but it can pull to all the emails.
Right.
So it's just the whole point of Process Street for me is to take the brain work out of the things that we do all the time.
So how do you iterate on those processes?
Not easily. We're actually working with Adam of Build the Process right now. We're actually doing a trade, which is always fun in business, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
So we're doing a trade where we're helping him with some of his content for his website because I don't think they've actually launched their website yet, or they haven't kind of like fleshed it out completely. But we're doing a trade where he knows Process Street backwards and forwards. And so he's rebuilding our main content workflow with all the things that he knows about process improvement that like I'm just a newbie at, and I could probably get to that point if I studied it very closely for a couple of years.
Yeah.
He already knows it. And so I think one thing for sure is we've been maybe at a disadvantage at the Blogsmith in that I'm the only one who knows the tool backwards and forwards. So I'm the bottleneck. Yeah. But now that we're working with Adam on this big process, we're going to benefit so much from all the knowledge that he has.
That reminds me of those like Notion experts that know like Notion in and out. And I'm over here just like, how do I add a new page? Like, I don't know how to use it as well. That's a good idea. I like the trade idea. I actually traded. I built my wedding planner's website for her services for free.
Oh, that's perfect.
That's the only trade I've ever done, but I feel like I
should have done that.
that more. Yeah, she didn't have a website at all. And I was like, you're way too talented to not have an online presence. She would like, people would text her and stuff. I'm like, no, this doesn't work. And now she's booked all the way through 2023.
Heck yeah.
And I'm like, there you go, girl.
Teamwork.
I have so many questions to ask you. I wanted to double down on the process thing.
Sure.
So when you hear the phrase like content operations, like how does that relate to you? And I know everyone has these little definitions, but like, how does that relate to like how you use Process Street and how like you've grown Blogsmith, and like, what does that look like for you right now?
Sure. I think, yeah, when I hear about operations, just like the word in general, it's like, what's everything that could go wrong, right?
Yeah.
What is the normal state of affairs that we're trying to make happen? And I think that Process Street reinforces the norm very well. Like that's the point of it for me, to have a process management tool is to kind of reinforce the norm, to sort of set expectations for what I want to see at each level, at the outline, at the writing, at the editing stage, at the keyword research stage. But I think it also, the way that we've built it and the way that you should build out any process is to anticipate the problems.
Mm-hmm. So how did you like solve for that while building it out? Like was it because you'd seen like previous problems happen before you used Process Street and you knew to anticipate them, or is it different for different client projects? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a little bit of both. I think when I started it was, what are the things that I can anticipate being a problem? Like if something has to go for multiple rounds of edits, like the status quo is that things maybe take one round of edits, but there are times where it takes 2 or 3. If it's a very complicated piece of content, that could happen. And it's not the norm, but I need to have a mechanism in place so that the team doesn't come back to me to say, well, what do we do?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. Kind of anticipate where there might be questions.
Right. And like, again, the whole point is to not be a bottleneck. I don't want anybody to be a bottleneck if we already have an answer or a possible, just even like something to think about. And I think that's an important thing to consider with process creation too, is that you may not be able to plan for every single possibility, right? There's just too many, but the more you can do to document your response in a certain situation, the better off you're going to be in the future. And so like one thing that we've done outside of Process Street in Airtable, because again, we're just kind of like experimenting with it and figuring out the best use cases. But basically I've trained our project manager and account managers, whenever you see some sort of client issue over email, like, first of all, I want to know about it. I'll definitely weigh in if I have anything that I can add to it. But ultimately, once you've solved it, like, let's document that. So we basically have a database that's like, here's kind of like the client question that somebody had to investigate because we didn't have a ready answer. for that specific situation.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's one thing that you could maybe do to solve it. Here's how we did solve it. So it's using actual examples,
right?
Client communications. And again, it's not gonna be something that helps in 100% of situations, but even if it helps in like 40% of them,
oh yeah,
it's a totally good use of time.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I feel like so many people talk about process and talk about documentation and all that stuff. But like I said, I don't know, 10 minutes ago or whatever, it's just doesn't come very naturally, especially for like independent contributors or practitioners. Like I feel like maybe managers have gotten into the habit, or now at your point, found like a founder or anything, but it's such a habit to build. And what's funny is it feels like it should be easy because you're just doing your job, but like writing about it or, writing it all down, but it's not, it's not easy. One thing you said about Process Street that was interesting, you said it was built for the enterprise client, but it seems like as a solo founder, seems to really have helped you out, if not just remove you from the minutia.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that my coding background to some extent factors into that, because it is a no code tool, or maybe low code. There's like some things that you could code into it, but it's that like logical way of thinking, like if this, then that, the sort of like conditional logic, or like, how does, this task build on that one? And so because I had that background, I think that helped me to be successful with this tool. So yeah, I think while it was maybe built for the enterprise, it probably has a team of people who can, fix things or make new things, whatever. If you do have that mindset going into it, then I think you would pick up on it very quickly. So
I see.
Yeah. So I to your point, I agree that like, just because it's maybe focused towards enterprise, there are a lot of applications for people who think in sort of that coding mindset.